From the right, Lloyd Smith. From the left, Philip Britt. And I'm your host, Barry Aycock, for In the Arena. Welcome to In the Arena. It's our new show about all things politics. Not just current politics, but the history of Missouri politics, U.S. politics. We're going to cover a lot of topics. We've got two experts here on the panel that can cover all those topics. So I would first like to welcome Philip Britt.
Well, thank you, Barry. I am Philip Britt. Some of you may remember me. A few years ago, I was a state representative for here in this area, Southeast Missouri. I then served 18 years as a treatment court judge here in Dunklin and Stoddard County, and have since retired from that position. But I've always been a student of politics. I have a degree in political science, but my whole life I've studied politics from the time I was a child until today. And so I'm very interested in how we're going to share that information with folks right here on In the Arena.
Lloyd, to the right, Lloyd Smith.
I'm Lloyd Smith. My career really began as a student at Southwest Missouri State, graduated, went on to work for Farm Bureau, and then most of you may know the Emersons. I went to work for them in 1981 in an ag role and went on to be chief of staff for both Bill and Joanne Emerson, and for the next 28 years managed their operations in the 28 counties at that time, now 30, and also managed several of their campaigns, both here and then a few statewide and a few presidential campaigns in Missouri. Went on to run the Missouri Republican Party for 4 years, and I'm really delighted to be here to maybe bring a little civility to how we talk about politics in the arena here on this show with Barry.
But on tonight's show, we're going to give you a history of presidential debates. Now, the first debate really known to man was the famous Lincoln-Douglas debate right over here in Illinois. It's about a 2-hour pilgrimage from here. Me and my wife and kids made that pilgrimage about 6 months ago, right when COVID hit. And it's a very historic site, and I want to recommend that to all the political buffs out there. You should go see the historical side of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I think Lincoln probably stood and spoke for 90 minutes straight. Stephen Douglas spoke for 60 minutes straight. I think, Lloyd, you told me there was 20,000 people that watched that debate. And debates have evolved over the years. So we're going to kind of just give you a history of some of the debates as some of us seen them. And we'll start there. Philip, you want to give us a little history of the debates?
Absolutely. And most people think that presidential debates have gone on for a long period of time. But in fact, the first time that two candidates for president of the United States debated each other was in 1948. There were two Republicans who debated each other in the Oregon Republican primary election. It was a radio broadcast, included Thomas Dewey, who we all know eventually won the primary and ran against Harry Truman. And lost to Harry Truman in that election. But Thomas Dewey and Harold Stassen, and the topic was very specific. The specific topic was outlawing the Communist Party in the United States of America. And so that was their topic, that they spent their entire debate talking about that very limited topic. The second debate was a Florida Democratic primary between two of the greatest names in political history, Adlai Stevenson and Estes Kefauver. I love those names. I've always loved those names. Maybe not everything that they did, but I love those names. So they actually were running against each other for to be able to compete against Dwight Eisenhower in 1956. And the topic was pretty broad. It was foreign and domestic policy. So that's pretty much covers everything. And so that debate happened in Florida. But then the debate that really changed the way we look at presidential debates, and that was two presidential candidates that actually faced off against each other on television. And Lloyd's going to share with us the 1960 debate between Nixon and Kennedy. So Lloyd, tell us about that.
Well, it's 1960. A lot of people in southeast Missouri and across the country had just gotten something in their living rooms that was pretty unique. It was called television. Television was new to most communities. People used to go down the street and visit their local neighbor if they had a television and no one else on the neighborhood or no one else on the street had one. In 1960, Kennedy was basically a junior senator, not a real well-known around the country. Nixon, of course, was vice president. The 22nd Amendment had kept Eisenhower from running for another term. That was basically passed because of the number of terms that Roosevelt had won in the 30s and 40s. Kennedy came from Massachusetts. Nixon, of course, as vice president from California, but he had been all over the country. And right at that time in our nation's history, the Soviet Union had developed something called Sputnik. Around here, they stood out in their front lawns and looked up at the sky to see it going around. We didn't have satellites. Sputnik was the first one. So we were behind in the space race. Communism was growing, and it appeared to a lot of people that the strength of Nixon in his foreign relations and having been vice president would make all the difference in the debate in 1960. But then television wreaked havoc on Richard Nixon. Nixon had fallen a few weeks before. He had actually hurt himself, been in the hospital, and he came to the debate 20 pounds underweight and ready for a really good fight. His problem, he put on a gray suit and a gray background. Again, television was not his friend. His opponent had done everything he could to be prepared for that debate, the right wardrobe, the right practicing, and again, he looked athletic, he was younger, he was bronzed. Some say it was because he had Addison's disease, which does cause you to be tanned even when you're not tanned. But he had also campaigned all across the country. And he was a Catholic. That was a drawback. But when that debate started, it appeared that Nixon was scared, shifty-eyed, like I might do right now and look over at Barry. Nixon would look at those asking him the questions. The difference was Kennedy looked right at the camera and answered the questions in a succinct manner. He looked energetic. As it got further into the debate and the lights got a little hotter, the cake makeup that Nixon had put on actually began to run, and that sweat caused him to look even more uncomfortable. On the radio, some people said Nixon won the debate, but the nearly 70 million people in the United States that were watching that new thing that was down the street or in their living room called television put the debate win heavily into Kennedy's category.
Philip is going to give us a little bit of feedback on, or a little bit of intel on the 1980 presidential debate.
Right, and one of the things that I think is interesting leading up to 1980 was after that 1960 debate, there wasn't another presidential debate, until 1976. In 64, Johnson didn't want to debate as the incumbent president. He refused to debate. And then Nixon, who'd had such a bad experience in 60, decided in 68 and 72 that television debate was just not for him, and he refused to be a part of those debates. So 1976 was the next presidential debate. That was between Ford and Carter. Ford had been elevated to president when Nixon resigned, so he hadn't been elected. And so it was essentially two people running in that election that had never been elected president. The first time that a sitting president running for re-election was part of a presidential debate was 1980, and that was President Jimmy Carter, who was being challenged by two people, in fact, one being the Republican nominee, former governor of California, Ronald Reagan, and a second independent candidate named John Anderson, who was a former congressman from Illinois. It was the first election I really followed, the first time I actually remember going with my parents to vote, and so kind of got me excited about elections and politics in general. But you got to remember a couple of things about that 1980 election. First is that there were three candidates, and Anderson really wanted to be a part of those debates. The League of Women Voters, who sponsored the debates in 76, 80, 84, were interested in having everybody as a part of the debate. But Carter didn't want it that way. Carter wanted a face-to-face between he and Ronald Reagan because he felt like they were the two candidates of the major parties and that they should be the two that would be part of the debate. And so the League of Women Voters went ahead without him. So the first debate in September of that year was just former Governor Ronald Reagan and former Congressman John Anderson, a third-party independent candidate. So really it was Reagan's show. It was almost became just Reagan's interview for the job. Anderson, he was fairly polished, but he wasn't like future President Reagan. Reagan, as you well know, he'd been a governor of California, but he'd also been an actor his entire life and his career. He'd been president of the Screen Actors Guild in California, so he was a very popular person and popular personality, but he knew how to deliver a line. And so he was very, very comfortable in front of a camera. Now, there was no concern on his face when he stood in front of the camera. He felt at home there. He felt like it was like a second home to him. And so that debate happened the week before the election, the Tuesday before Election Day. There was a second debate, and that one included Governor Reagan and President Carter. And it was obvious which one felt more comfortable in front of the camera. It was clearly President Reagan, soon to be President Reagan. It was President Carter was struggling with what was going on in not only in our nation, domestic policy, because there were lines for gasoline. Oil was scarce at the time. The hostages were being held in Iran. The embassy had been taken over. And so there were lots of really difficult issues that he was facing, all of which President Reagan, future President Reagan, I keep calling him that, but all of which Governor Reagan really focused on, laser focused on President Carter's last 4 years. And in fact, he uttered in the close of that particular debate, he uttered one of the greatest questions of all time in a political debate, and one that's asked every time now, anytime you run against an incumbent. He looked at that camera in the closing and he said, "I want every one of you to ask yourselves, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" And most people the answer was no. Inflation was high, gas prices were high. There was just a lot of challenges domestically and internationally. And the results of the election showed that a lot of people asked themselves that question, and the answer was no. And so President Reagan was elected by a sizable margin. But again, just like Kennedy in 1960, Reagan felt so comfortable in front of that camera. It didn't come from, like Kennedy, the practice that he did before he got there. It came from a lifetime of practice in front of a camera. And what we've seen since then is that television has really changed the way we look at candidates. A candidate who doesn't photograph well or doesn't appear well in front of a camera, doesn't show well, is generally not as accepted as one who does. After that, the League of Women Voters decided that they were done with the presidential debates because there was a commission set up, a debate commission, presidential debate commission. And since then, every 4 years, there's been a debate among the candidates for president. Only one other time since then were there more than two people in the debate. Clinton and Bush and first Bush and Ross Perot were all on the stage together, which made for an interesting dynamic because, as many of you probably remember, Ross Perot was a dynamic character in and of himself. And so he really changed the dynamic of those debates.
I've actually attended 2 debates in my lifetime. One of them was the Jim Talent, Bob Holden gubernatorial debate. I believe that was in 2000. I found it to be very boring, and I don't think it moved the needle for either contestant. But yes, almost 4 years ago to this date, I think it was around October 8th of 2016, I attended the Trump-Clinton debate on the campus of Washington University. I remember it being a very long day. You had to do all the check-in stuff. I think prior to that, you had to be cleared by the Secret Service. You had to get your registration done at one location on campus. It was kind of a hurry up and wait all day that day. So once I got registered, I waited for 2 or 3 hours. I'm sure they had some food and drinks and things like that. Then they loaded us up on a bus and actually took us to the debate location. I think we got there about an hour before the debate started. And I remember being in line with Roy Temple. Everybody involved in Missouri politics has heard of Roy Temple from Puxico. But like I said, it was hurry up and wait, get registered, get in line, get on a bus. Once we got inside the Washington University arena campus, I forgot the name of the building, but I was seated by Claire McCaskill's son. Somehow, some way, him and I were watching the debate together. And I just remember watching the debate. That was the debate right before Donald Trump's famous video come out about grabbing women in the wrong body parts. It had just come out, I believe. So to counteract that, that's the night that Donald Trump brought all Bill Clinton's former girlfriends in, supposed girlfriends in. So it was kind of a surreal moment when the Trump campaign marched all those women out to the debate. You know, a lot of people on TV didn't get to see that because it was kind of over to the side. And it was a very small place to have a debate, I thought. There was not a lot of people there in person. But it was a surreal moment when all those women come out, you know, the backdrop, the atmosphere of all the accusations, the videos coming out. And as far as the debate goes, I just remember Donald Trump kind of walking around the stage awkwardly around Hillary Clinton. But it wasn't as bad as it was played on TV after the debate, the stalking, you know, the famous stalking debate. In person, it really wasn't that bad. But, you know, the media on TV afterwards, it was a terrible thing. But like I said, in person, it was viewed as totally different. You know, you're not supposed to clap or boo during a debate, but both sides got boos and claps. You know, nobody went by the rules. In light of the background and the history we kind of give you on presidential debates, Lloyd, do you think the debates really matter? Does it move the needle for either candidate?
You know, in the one that I actually talked about in 1960, when they did the analysis afterwards, in that election, the margin was about 113,000 votes nationwide. There were 6% of the people that said the debates helped them make up their mind. And the first debate was the dominant debate. So I think it probably put Nixon on the defensive. He was a little bit ahead going into that debate. And from that point forward, I think he was somewhat playing catch up. But 113,000 votes nationwide, now that's not the Electoral College, obviously. I think it probably made a difference, just that snapshot of the image. And the fact that television was so new, and the only way you could see it would be have one, go down the street and watch it with your neighbor, and everybody wanted to be involved. And as a percent of the population, actually, more people watched that debate than even watched the one 4 years ago when we had 84 million as a percent of population. And think again how few people had television, so they had to go borrow and watch from someplace else. I think that one was significant. If you move forward, I think probably if you're the incumbent and defending yourself, and again, I think that's probably why Obama didn't do really well in 12 in the first debate, and probably why Carter, defending a 4-year record, was also at a disadvantage. And in a few minutes, when we talk a little bit about this year, when you're the incumbent, you have to look at what you've done and where you are as a nation, and I think that can make a debate really difficult for those people who are incumbents at the time. But I really think it made a difference in 60.
So that was a turning point in 60. Yeah. Philip, what do you think about debates? Are they worth it?
Of course they're worth it, because if you don't do them, it's going to be a real negative for you. But I think the answer is they can really hurt you. I don't know how much they can help you. If you stumble, if you make some real serious mistakes, I think they can cause you real problems. even if you win the debate, do you win over a whole bunch of folks? Probably not. But if you stumble, if you say something totally outrageous, well, the reality is until the last couple of elections, if you say something totally outrageous, you can lose. It seems that the population maybe has changed, or the media has changed, or our perception has changed a little bit now, where things maybe don't seem as outrageous as they once did. Just winning a debate doesn't win the election for you.
Well, the state of today's election is, if you look at the popular vote and all the polling, Biden has a big lead in the popular vote right now. He has a slight lead in the Electoral College. And Lloyd, tell us how you think Joe Biden did the other night.
Well, I think Joe Biden went into that debate without a lot of prep ahead of time out in the public domain. He had been off the campaign trail. That showed just a little bit. But he also knew he was ahead in the polls. And I think probably being ahead of the polls made him a little cautious in the initial part of that debate. And I think it put him in a position where he had done enough homework to hit the high points. You could tell that he hadn't been out on the debate stump a lot, had not been out on the campaign stump, I mean. And that probably showed up later in the debate where he became a little bit fatigued because you need that energy level, if you can, to push it all the way through 90 minutes. And probably the tone of the debate did not play to his strength. His strength would have been foreign policy and knowledge after having been 8 years as the vice president. But I think by and large, it was one of those debates that I never thought I'd see. It was different than any I'd ever helped on. I prepped a few. I've done background on debates. I was a little bit surprised about the give and take. I think some of the things that happens now in debates didn't happen in 1960. You had a question, you answered the question, your opponent answered the question. Sometimes there was a small rebuttal. The back and forth between the two candidates was not something that was done really until the last couple of debates in a big way. So I think it's going to be interesting as we move forward to the debates in the future, even in this election cycle. What does it mean when you have someone who wants to dominate from the beginning? And I know Phil's going to talk a lot about President Trump. I think he came in wanting to be the aggressor, and I certainly saw that last week.
Well, the debate decor and the civility really got through out the window on both sides right off the bat. Maybe one side was more aggressive than the other, but it was really both sides that really come in really not prepared just to sit down and shut up and listen to the other person.
I expected the president to be aggressive. He's always aggressive on stage like that. I expected him to be a little bit over the top. I expected him to always want to have the last word, but I really didn't expect it to be to the level and extent that it actually turned out to be. It really felt, it almost felt like he was almost a schoolyard bully. It felt like he, if any time that Biden wanted to have to answer, he would try to deflect it and speak over him. And the fact that he spoke over him so often that the moderator had to just finally say, "Stop, we cannot do this anymore. People can't even tell what the two of you are saying." I mean, my notes got so jumbled up a couple of times because of the fact that they were both talking at the same time. One was trying to answer a question and the other was talking over. And it happened both ways, but as Chris Wallace pointed out, it happened more from President Trump than it did from Vice President Biden. But I was just really astonished. And some of the things that I watched afterwards, the people pointed that out. Even some of the Republican pundits were saying, we expected him to come out very aggressive, but that was way more than we expected. Some even saying that was over the top, it was unnecessary. I believe that he sees the polls too. The fact that Lloyd pointed out that Biden may have been a little bit complacent because of the fact that he feels like he's got a little bit of a lead. Trump may have felt the same way that he may be behind a little bit and had to make up some ground, and he needed to do that by going hard at a few pointed issues, and he did that. You know, he went after Joe Biden's son, which we expected that to happen, Hunter Biden, because there's been so much talk about him over the last several months or years now. And so there were several times when that happened. I don't know how much President Trump connected with the people. It seemed like most of his direction was at Vice President Biden rather than to the people he was talking to. And the purpose of a debate, I think, is to speak to the American people. And I didn't see a lot of that. I saw a whole lot more, I do things better than you do things, and that was, instead of being, this is our policy and this is why it's been successful. He did that a little bit, but it just felt like there wasn't enough of that from him. I felt like there should have been a little bit more connecting with those of us who are sitting at home watching it on our televisions. And so I think that was the part of it that probably disappointed me as much as any when it came to how was he perceived. I mean, there were some policy things that I obviously didn't agree with. I certainly struggled with watching him not just adamantly denounce white supremacy and some of the things that he had an opportunity to do. There were a couple of times, and he's done it before, so I don't know why he didn't do it then. He had the opportunity. The question was specifically asked about race, and he just didn't take the opportunity to put that to rest, so to speak. And I think that's going to hurt him. I think it's going to, in the end, may inspire some people that might not have been as excited about getting out and voting. They might now actually go to the poll.
The American people lost at the debate the other night. There was no vision for the future. I thought it was totally embarrassing and out of line for any debate to start talking about someone's son that has a drug problem. I thought it was terrible.
Well, I won't, condone that. I think probably it was more the business relationship that son had with China and some other countries. I think when you're talking about vision, I think a couple of things. One, Biden was a little bit, he held back. He wouldn't go with what was in what I call the Biden-Bernie report. And I think it would have been difficult for him to defend some of that. The climate part of that was chaired by John Kerry and co-chaired by AOC is a dramatic departure for anything that we've seen so far in our country. And I think I would have preferred, truthfully, for each of the candidates to have talked about what they've done on the issue of climate, what they planned on doing on the issue of climate, what they've done on the issue of jobs, what they plan on doing on the issue of jobs. And I think the president probably should have talked a lot more about the economy prior to COVID and utilized that as his springboard to make a discussion about what he would do in the future. And I think Biden, the vice president, should have talked about the 8 years that they had, and they did have some improvement during that period. Not as dramatic probably as when President Trump came on and relieved a lot of regulations, built the Keystone Pipeline, allowed fracking to extend, made us basically energy independent. One of the things that makes us in this part of the world very, very sensitive to the whole climate argument is that we have fairly cheap energy in this part of the United States. And unlike Oregon, Washington, where my daughter lives, she doesn't even have to have air conditioning. Oh, I've had to have air conditioning before. And I think coal-fired power plants in the Biden approach, if they had gotten into that, I would like to see how do you eliminate coal-fired power plants by 2035 when 80% of the electricity in the state of Missouri comes from coal. And what will that mean to those states that depend upon coal for their energy? And there's some other areas that should have been talked about. Under prescription drugs, and my old boss, Joanne Emerson, was in favor of importing drugs from overseas if we could make sure that they were safe. because of the disparity in the cost in, let's say, the UK or the EU to the United States. So my hope is that the debate will center on Trump, what have you done and what do you plan on doing? And Biden, what are your plans? And I think if we get down to that point, the American people will be better served. I think both bases are where they are. I don't think you're going to move anyone off those bases. But I think independents in the middle, particularly independents that are in the suburbs or independents that are in these rural areas, need to look at what is the policy and what's it mean to me.
Join us next week in the arena as we analyze tomorrow night's vice presidential debate.